Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity. Brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Sense. I'm your host, Lexi Dragelowitz, and today we are discussing the hiring perspective with some of our experts from our risk department. We have Rob Stouter, Kathy Murray, Dustin Farthing, Cheryl Benedict, and Derek Rush. So if you all don't mind to go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourselves, that would be great.
Thanks, Lexi. So this is Rob Stouter. I'm a senior manager with LBMC. I work primarily on our internal audit and SOC reporting groups.
Hi all, my name is Kathy Murray. I am a manager with our LBMC Risk Services team, and I'm specifically focused on our security consulting group, focused on risk assessments from a regulatory perspective as well as a security framework perspective, and anything also from a data privacy, such as your regulations, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and other statewide privacy considerations.
Hey, this is Dustin Farthing. I'm a manager. I work with Rob in the IT assurance practice. Spend most of my time with SOC reporting and internal audit co-sourcing engagements.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Cheryl Benedict. I work in the PCI practice primarily, but I do also help assist other practice service lines within SOC's reporting, and risk assessments.
And this is Derek Rush, a manager here at LBMC and a reformed auditor that currently focuses mainly on penetration assessments for clientele.
Thanks, everybody. So our goal today is to give our listeners a brief insight of what to expect when interviewing for a role in information security. As college students and young professionals are gearing up for job interviews, we're hopeful that this podcast will help them in their preparations. So I just have a couple questions for each of you. If you're ready, we'll go ahead and begin. So first off, when you all are looking at different interviewing candidates, what are some qualities that you're looking for?
So I think there's a few things, that you look for when you're meeting candidates and interviewing candidates. I think the first thing is you're looking at their personality and if you think they'd be a good fit with LBMC. You want to see that they're confident and they're well prepared, but also if they communicate well. I think everybody, we expect a certain level of academic performance, but I'm sure they've demonstrated that at the university or their college already. So that's sort of the first thing that gets them in the door. But once they're in there, just being able to communicate and relate and be a good fit for the LBMC culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Rob, especially when just that initial first time meeting candidates, you kind of want to have that, just that first time impression. So I think that's great. Kathy?
Yeah, so things that I look for, very similar to Rob, is how an individual holds themselves, presents themselves, verbally communicates to those individuals. I think it's important given, especially the work that we do with such direct client interaction and interface. So being able to communicate well and articulate what it is you're trying to get across is very important. And then in addition to that, I think being a fit within the LBMC culture is very important. At the end of the day, you want to be able to work with your colleagues, not just from a professional perspective, but also just from a friendly banter and really being part of that LBMC family feel.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kathy. We really do have a great team here. So we definitely want to make sure that we're attracting people that are going to fit in well with not only our team, but are also going to help meet our clients' expectation of just the different people that they've already worked with. So that's a great point. Dustin, what about you?
Yeah, and so if I'm thinking about it from the perspective of interacting with someone, obviously as a human being, there's certain characteristics that naturally just leave an impression after you meet somebody. So their presence, do they come across as confident and poised? Are they unsure of themselves and intimidated and kind of have more of that vibe, if you will? So also their ability to have small talk kind of effortlessly. Maybe it's not easy. Maybe it takes a lot of effort for them to put themselves out there. But, if talking to them is easy, that certainly comes through. And that's something that stays with you, as we kind of transition away from small talk and move more into the topics about like the firm itself and the profession in general. Do they seem genuinely interested and are they asking like thoughtful questions and demonstrating their interest in that way? So, it's okay if a candidate doesn't necessarily have the ability to make that strong first impression through communication. By no means would remove them from consideration from a position if they, didn't have that gift of gab. but the candidate would need to find other ways to distinguish themselves. And so, wouldn't necessarily be too stressed if the social setting is not necessarily the strong suit. The cream will rise, as they say.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think we put a lot of stock into that first initial small talk effort. So knowing that candidates have a way to redeem themselves, so if the first initial interaction doesn't go well, I think is a good thing for candidates to keep in mind. Cheryl, what about you?
Yeah, so a lot of people have already kind of talked a little bit about the communication aspects and really what we would look for in candidates, and just being able to speak out, about your experience, and then also being able to talk to clients, since really that's the way we do our business on a day-to-day. I wanted to provide some additional perspective, for people who might want to be looking into the PCI or the payment card industry, credit card security aspect. For those who are just starting out, we're really just looking for someone who has the demonstrated passion for information technology and security. So just taking a look at any job experience, if you have any prior internship experience, that would be helpful. Also, even just looking at your coursework. Do you have a degree in information technology? Are you going for your bachelor's degree? Or are you also looking at maybe other continuing education outside of your current degree program? So just looking at any other potential self-study courses and things like that, just to broaden your horizons in technology and security.
Yeah, that's great, Cheryl, especially from a PCI standpoint. Thanks for giving us that insight. Derek?
Yeah, Lexi, I guess I would say even outside of PCI, one of the things that I look for just involves the candidate having some level of interest that's communicated via either passion of knowledge, or kind of like Cheryl was getting at, the initiative to go above and beyond that which is given to them by requirement. And by requirement, it could be, you're going through your schooling program and you have to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if a candidate came to me with, let's say, in their spare time, they documented and wrote about some of their projects on their blog regarding standing up a firewall within Amazon Web Services and configuring it, perhaps standing up some vulnerable machines and using a vulnerability assessment tool against them, and then perhaps fixing some of the vulnerabilities and rescanning them, and just writing about that process. If a candidate came to me with that level of expertise, I would very likely hire them, especially if it was out of college, just knowing that they went above and beyond what they were asked to do, and they have that passion and interest within the information security field to just go out and go exploring, learn about the technologies on your own outside of just simply what you're told to do by requirement. That is one thing that can just put a candidate above and beyond. And if a candidate has kind of all the things that we've talked about here, the ability to do small talk and the ability to, work well and interface well with clients and internal team members, and kind of small talk being a good gauge of that, and then this above and beyond aspect of just getting your hands dirty, so to speak, with technology and learning about it, that would be a great candidate.
Yeah, that's a good point, Derek, because speaking as somebody who did not go through an information security coursework in college, I think it's good to remember that even if that's not what your focus is in college, and maybe you didn't get a degree with that, there's still opportunities for you as long as you're willing to put in the work and are able to demonstrate that to your interviewer or future place of hire that you're considering. So that's a really great perspective, Derek. Thanks for sharing. So our next question is, in regards to resume, in a few short words, what would you all say makes a great resume? I know sometimes you're quickly shifting through resumes and you're kind of looking for a few key things. So if you guys don't mind, just to give us a few quick things that you're looking for in a candidate's resume, that would be great.
Yeah, Lexi, I would say I've heard over the years that it's good to have a concise resume, and I don't think it has to be one page. Some people will say that. I don't think it has to be, but I think it's important to include the right information that communicates what you've done, and to highlight things that are beyond the normal processes. So instead of just saying I analyzed spreadsheets for, at my job, I was an analyst, maybe you created a process that streamlined it and saved everybody 10 hours a week or 10 hours a month. Make sure to highlight that, the unique things that differentiate you from other people in the same position. I think it's important not to have any typos. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward, but typos and formatting should be on point. The last thing I would say about the resumes as you're preparing for the interviews is just make sure that everything's on there for a reason and you can speak to it. So if you're going to ask a question about anything on your resume, you have a way to tie it back to the position that you're interviewing for. Otherwise you're going to ask you a question, and if you have a poor answer, that may, just may not reflect well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to tie back to what Dustin was saying about how maybe communication isn't your stronghold and you kind of get nervous talking to people in that first initial reaction, I think a resume is a great opportunity for you to shine and be able to type up and clearly state your experience and different things that you've learned through the years. So that's a great recommendation, Rob. Kathy?
Yeah, so for myself, when thinking about our security consulting team, much of what we do is really just relying on our knowledge and capabilities. So when it comes to resumes, I look at the individual's ability to document in such a way that is clear and concise to the reader, that I understand what's the intent of their experience. What did they gain from their knowledge and sense of education, right? What would they learn from that degree that would then facilitate and or support knowledge, experience within the role? It does not mean that we're looking for candidates that have direct technology type degrees. I actually have an accounting degree, not necessarily IS. I did get some minor in programming, but it's just much more of being able to convey what it is that your background would display in alignment with the role. I've also received tons of resumes that have a lot of color coding, a lot of blocks of information, which is very distracting to the reader, at least for myself. Again, I look for something that's clear and concise. So really just having your title of your name with your address and then just document your experience in education. The more that you put into it from a box and color coding and different font types, it becomes very distracting. So my big recommendation is to keep it simple.
Yeah, that's a good point. Keeping it clear and straight to the point. So it's not only easy for the readers, but it's easy to pass along and then hopefully easier for the candidates to speak to. So they're not also getting tripped up by different things that maybe they put on the resume and forgot about or didn't intend to. So, Dustin?
I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective. In my view, resumes are very important on the one hand, but they're certainly not the only factor. If I have the opportunity to meet a candidate first and they make a great first impression, what's on their resume becomes infinitely less important as long as there aren't any red flags, obviously. Where resumes can become very important is if you're, forced to evaluate candidates in that stack of resumes without having met them. Well, I certainly don't like being in that situation. If that is the case, obviously things like GPA and unique or very relevant experiences are the things that are going to differentiate a candidate. So in addition to what Rob and Kathy have already said, my advice would be certainly to spend time on your resume, make it concise, make it polished, make it the best representation of yourself that it can be, but would certainly urge anyone to do everything in their power to supplement submitting that resume with a meaningful interaction in order to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, that's good. I think it speaks a lot to, your first time interacting with people and in your resume supplementing that and not letting it be the end all be all. So, Cheryl?
As far as the PCI practice, as far as what we look for on resumes, becoming a PCI qualified security assessor, it does take 3 years of minimum experience to become a qualified security assessor. Those who are just starting out, you really do not need to know PCI compliance out of the gate. We just need those individuals who can highlight and kind of talk through their experience in coursework that they may have had from a technology standpoint, whether it be, like Derek was mentioning, how you go about building a firewall and configuring that firewall in Amazon Cloud Security, and just how you go about, setting up maybe like a miniature lab within your home network at home, setting up virtual machines, and if you're able to kind of go through and configure and install operating systems and being able to configure those in a secure manner. So if you're able to kind of like implement some of those things, or it would be great things to be as talking points as part of your resume. Also, maybe highlighting any internships or part-time jobs you may have held, any clubs that you may have belonged to, and then any other special technology classes or extracurricular activities that you may have belonged to in college.
Yeah, so I think we're getting a really great reoccurring theme of your resume is a tool for communication. So, Derek?
To continue just down the road of practical examples as it relates to, what can you do for things that you can put on your resume? The first question was kind of what could you do? And then this question is really just around documenting what you did. So to be clear, I have yet to have a candidate come to some sort of interview that has already done these sorts of things. However, if one did, I would absolutely hire them if they were a good fit socially. So again, just the practical examples around using cloud services or, standing something up on your home network. Maybe you don't necessarily know how to do that. So you reach out to one of your system administrator friends who may be in a similar degree, program, or career path, and you have them help you set up those machines that you can then scan for vulnerabilities and go through the audit process against a framework. If somebody were able to successfully document that within their resume and communicate that, like Dustin was saying, perhaps in first meeting, to where it's, even better than being written down, that would just be a great candidate whose resume would stand out above the rest, whether it's in text or again, meeting them in person, and that sort of work experience that was done on one's own time was communicated effectively.
Awesome. Well, just moving right along, I just want to ask you all to see if maybe you have any go-to interview questions. And if you do, what are some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, Lexi. So I'm probably going to take a little bit of a different spin on this question. I think that there's a lot of companies that will have different sort of topics they want you to address during the interview. So if you're interviewing with 3 or 4 people, they may cover some different areas and have kind of different questions they want you to ask. But my advice would be, and I think the 2 most important questions in the interview might be the first one and the last one. And the reason I would say that, again, especially if you haven't met before the interview, even though the first question may be something simple, might be like, why did you decide to go to the university you're at? That's your first chance to respond. And I've seen some interviews where people will talk for 5 minutes on why they decided to go to that university. And while we're certainly interested in learning about them, that might be a lot of time to, spend on why you decided to go there. So I would say that the first question is important, even if it's sort of a softball question, doesn't seem related to the job. It's a good opportunity, again, to make a first impression and kind of set a tone. And the last question, which might also be one of my favorites, is I just like to make sure I wrap up an interview asking them, do you have any questions for me? And I think it's important for people to, try to have some questions at the end of the interview. Either you have some prepared ahead of time and, you've thought about them. And even if you're interviewing with 3 or 4 people, you try to save a couple. But also, it's even better if based off of the conversation that you've had, you've heard certain things and you're able to ask a question that ties back to something that you've talked to, because that just shows a little bit of interest, that you're paying attention, that you're active listening, which are all good skills that you're going to want to have if you work for LBMC, because when you're meeting with clients, you need to be able to listen to what they're saying, keep track of what you want to think about, and ask them about when they're done presenting whatever they're talking on. So I don't know what my most favorite is, but I think the first and last are pretty important questions.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Kathy?
Sure. So 2 questions that I tend to ask most frequently, and this is once we've somewhat gotten into the swing of the interview. And so they're sort of the questions just to bolt in during our conversation. And one is, what do you hope to gain, whether that's personally or professionally, from the opportunity? What that sort of tells me is the intent or what drew that individual to the requisition. And what I want to try and ascertain is if they truly have a desire to work in the field, whether that is in IT assurance, whether that is doing audits, or whether that is doing something specific with security consulting and doing risk assessments. It'll really give me an idea as to whether or not the individual truly understands the purpose of the requisition and the hire and the need for the hire, right? And then in addition to that, if that individual really, I can tell that they are very interested in the opportunity, one of the other questions that I would ask would be, what tools or strategies do you use to maintain the priority, the priority of your tasks assigned? What we tend to do is not just only security consulting, but really across the entire risk services team, is we're constantly juggling and balancing a number of priorities, tasks, and or clients. And so with that is, what is that individual's strategy for ensuring that they are getting things completed timely, responding to either internal management requests, client delivery tasks, things of that nature. And so just trying to see what their methods to keep themselves in the loop with requirements, communication efforts to management, and things of that nature.
Thanks, Kathy. I think those questions are really great, and they definitely tie back to the role that the candidate is applying for. So I think that's super helpful for our listeners to be aware of. Justin?
So for campus recruits who don't already have experience with IT audit, I'm focusing on questions that will allow me to assess their critical thinking and communication abilities. So over the course of the interview, I'll generally ask several questions that challenge the candidate in that way. I generally try to do that more organically than just having canned questions. But an example might be for them to walk me through their thought process whenever they're faced with a decision. And what I'm looking for in their response is their ability to, one, stay focused and answer the question that was asked. Nerves can sometimes set in, thought processes can stray. And so responses kind of deviate from the original question. So it's definitely something I'm aware of and looking for. Number two, I would say their ability to use sound reasoning in their answers. And three, just that ability to clearly communicate the thoughts that they're trying to convey.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin. Cheryl?
Yeah, just echoing on what Kathy was talking about a little bit earlier, which is kind of more geared towards project management and how you guys, the students, would be able to manage and prioritize multiple tasks and projects that they might be assigned. So generally, I would have the candidate kind of just walk me through how they would ensure that they get their projects done on time. Are you given a certain amount of time, whether it be a couple of weeks, to conduct a certain task or write a report? And how do you guys track that? If you guys use like a daily planner or a weekly task list or something like that, we would just like to identify what is your tool of method of choice to ensure that you can keep track of things that are going on, since we do juggle a lot of different projects and do have multiple projects occurring at one time. So just being able to manage your time well and being able to communicate, really what's going on to your project leads when you do work on all these different projects is very helpful. One of the other questions that we would typically ask is just looking at and just being able to address what your biggest accomplishments are. Really can be something that you are proud of, something that you are kind of more interviewing towards as far as a particular role or type of project. So just being able to look at what you're proud of within that accomplishment, whether it been the success of a project or was it a team effort that you may have worked on a project at school, and just really what you've learned through that effort. So being able to kind of describe what that approach was and how you guys have achieved having a successful project, that would be helpful just to kind of talk through that as well. And lastly, is just looking at describing a difficult situation that you've had to deal with. And those are always really difficult questions. But we like to think through that methodically and just really examining what your skills and your analytical abilities are, and just having you describe, what that problem was. What's your analysis to that problem and how you address that issue. So just looking at, what solutions you're able to provide as part of that difficult situation you've dealt with, and then just being able to communicate that effectively.
Thanks, Cheryl. I definitely love that you gave great tips on how to track time management by using different tools such as a planner. For anybody listening that you don't already do that, I think that's a great opportunity to demonstrate your time management skills, whether within school or outside of school. So thanks for sharing that, Cheryl. Derek?
Yeah, on the front of resumes, I guess I would like to just remind everybody that my perspective here is one that assists in managing the penetration assessment practice here at LBMC. So as that relates to campus recruits and recruiting people directly from college, there is just a lot of knowledge that has to be at one's fingertips in order to be successful in a role like this. So you may notice a theme here, and what I'm about to say is a question that I like just because I touched on it for the qualities that I'm looking for in a candidate, and I also talked about it during the what makes a great resume question. So this question is simply tell me a bit about how you pursue security knowledge in your spare time. So once again, our capture the flags and sort of hack the box type of exercises? Are they being executed consistently? Are there write-ups available that perhaps you published on your blog or something similar along those lines? Again, just to not only go out and take the initiative to learn more about security, but to document it in a way that can communicate so much to me as a hiring manager, where we see that you can write clearly and concise. We see that you can not only write words clearly and concise, but you can communicate ideas around maybe what vulnerability you identified or how you identified it, and then how you went about exploiting it. If a candidate is able to go out and do all of those things, and then they can also talk about them intelligently during the interview process, I feel like that's just a great question to allow the candidate to show their passion for the topic. Is it a 1 or 2 word answer? Probably not a good fit. Is it, a 5 to 10 minute conversation talking to the candidate about a personal project that they've been working on that taught them a lot about security? Love to see that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's great, Derek. It's a really good point. I guess the more that candidates have to say about things like that, the more that you can definitely tell the passion is there. So thanks for sharing that. My next question is, have you ever interviewed for a job and not received the position? If so, what did you learn from that experience? So, Rob?
Of course, I've gotten every job I've ever interviewed for. No, I would think back to college. Probably, I mean, in college, I probably had 8 to 10 interviews that I didn't get offers for. As I think back, I would say I would recommend that the interviewees think about making sure they're prepared and understand the job and the company, and not just walk in thinking you can get through it because you're doing a bunch of interviews. And then I would also encourage everybody to take advantage of and do mock interviews, either through the college if they have them, or maybe you can do it with friends or a coworker or a professor or somebody that you can have them ask you questions that you don't know what they're going to ask, and you get experience providing feedback that hopefully relates to the position you're interviewing for. I would say definitely make sure you get feedback. Then once you do the mock interview, ask the interviewer for the feedback. What can you do better? Don't expect it to be perfect. And I will tell you, I've done many rounds of mock interviews, and I remember one candidate specifically who the mock interview with him, he wouldn't have made it to second interviews, but we gave him feedback that he needed to be prepared. He needed to be more energetic and act more interested. When he came back the following year, he actually was hired by us. So that'd be probably the biggest lesson learned, I'd say, is be prepared, take advantage of mock interviews, or create some mock interviews for yourself so you can get used to answering different types of questions.
Yeah, that's great advice, Rob. Thanks for sharing. Kathy?
Sure. And I most definitely have not gotten every job. That's for sure. So everybody will most likely feel this crush or sort of pain sometime in their life. But what I do in these situations, I actually do send an email and or some method of communication, however it may have been, to that interviewer, whether it's through HR or just depending if it's within your college setting and they're on site. I do send back an email saying, thank you for the opportunity. And, I appreciate even interviewing. And although I wasn't accepted or extended an offer, could some information please be provided as to why I did not get accepted or be considered for the opportunity? The reason being, it could simply be, oh, we're looking for folks with more experience, or maybe we were looking for individuals that were obtaining a degree in XYZ. If that information is obtained, for the most part, you don't have to continue to beat yourself up about it, right? But then it also, depending on if the feedback is more so from an experience perspective, or if it's an opportunity that you're really trying to obtain, and maybe you have to find experience from an internship or through other means, then maybe you can get that direction once that feedback is provided. So to me, it's very helpful to obtain that feedback. And also, as an individual interviewing folks for a potential opportunity, receiving those emails actually shows a level of interest in that opportunity that may not have been conveyed in the interview. So there have been times where a candidate may not have been necessarily extended an offer, but based on some of the follow-up emails, whether it's a thank you note or soliciting feedback, really changes the perspective of how me as an interviewer for a potential opportunity may change my view of that individual. So it may also just stay with me on that follow-up feedback that I may maintain that individual's resume, or if I didn't fulfill the position, reconsider that candidate. So it's always helpful just to solicit feedback when that situation arises.
That's really great advice, Kathy. I've actually never heard somebody recommend following up on why they didn't receive the position, just to follow up with the interviewee, thanking them for their time. So I think that's really great recommendation for our listeners. Dustin?
Yeah, so Lexi, I too have experienced rejection. I'm going to speak about a specific experience that I had when going through the campus recruiting process. So I had an interview with a firm. We're going into it. I already had an offer from another firm, and I was all but certain I was going to accept that position. So I spent too much of the interview with the second firm on offense and asking questions that were, trying to have them sell me on why this firm and position was better than the one that I already had an offer with. And in retrospect, I think that absolutely made the wrong impression. And if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have approached those conversations as though, it was their job to sell me. So my advice would be to approach every interview that you have with an open mind, because while you may think you already have made your decision, you never know what you might learn. So, this other firm, may become even more impressive, and you might find that they are actually a better fit for you. So it's definitely best to give each interview an honest opportunity and approach it with humility, and not make your decision even subconsciously until you have, all the offers on the table and all the information.
Yeah, that's a great advice, Dustin. Thanks for sharing your experience. Cheryl?
Yes, I'm just kind of echoing, with everyone else's comments here. Very similar experiences with the rejection of not getting the opportunity for certain roles. This is really early on in my career days through college, and just kind of, working with the interviewees and just trying to send those follow up letters, thanking them for the interview. And then also, even just working with HR after the fact and just sending them a quick follow up note saying, thank you for the opportunity to interview with your organization. Could you share any additional details on things that went well with the interview, things that I could improve upon? That way, both kind of the positives and negatives as far as what you did well and what you can improve upon in future interviews. And then just echoing again on Rob's feedback, just kind of working with your career center, if you do have one in college, or if not, conduct those mock interviews. And this would be very beneficial for anybody, for young professionals and students that are kind of preparing for that interview, being more comfortable in their own skin, being able to communicate effectively, being able to show that passion and excitement for the role that they are applying for.
Yeah, that's great advice, Cheryl. While I was in school, a couple friends and I got together and we asked some professors to do mock interviews with us as well. So maybe your school doesn't have a career center that you can go and do mock interviews, but I definitely want to piggyback what Cheryl and Rob were saying and find other opportunities to conduct mock interviews, maybe with the professor or some other professional that wouldn't mind giving you honest feedback. Derek, what about you?
What comes to mind here for me is really just around the chance for some self-reflection when it comes to perhaps not being given an offer by whoever you may be interviewing with. So maybe there were some questions during the interview process that you felt you didn't answer correctly or as well as you could have. Buy a book on it, go do some research on it, try to think maybe what exactly were they getting at, what body of knowledge should you have at your fingertips that you don't necessarily have. Outside of self-reflection, I think it's also important to just add that as another feather in the cap for some experience that you gained along the way. The idea that practice makes perfect applies to the interview process as well. So the mock interviews are a great idea, as well as just going through the interview process. Perhaps there's one place that you really want to work, or let's say there's a pool of 5 places, one of those places you really want to work. Perhaps you submit some paperwork, your resume, cover letter, and whatnot for the ones you don't want to work at as much to get some practice before you do with whatever place you may actually want to work at the most.
That's great advice, Derek. Thanks for sharing. All right, so for our final question, we've given our listeners a lot of really great advice so far, but if you could give them one final piece of advice as they're gearing up and preparing for their interviews, what would it be? Rob, you can start us off.
Yeah, I guess it's a little different due to the world that we're in today, but the thing that comes to mind is just to try to attend as many recruiting or social events, or if it's class presentations with recruiters, that you can. And I think that just gives you, It gives you more touch points with the company to learn about it and learn about the people that work there. It also gives us or others the opportunity to get to know you better. And so just the more touch points you have, I think the more it helps both parties. And keep in mind, I think one of the key goals when you're looking for a job. I know, and especially in college, you just want to get a job sometimes. But the more you can know about the people and feel like you fit in and get excited and say, "Hey, I already know Dustin. I like Dustin. I look forward to working with Dustin." All those types of things before you accept the job is good. So I just say again, just look for as many touch points as you can get with the companies to learn as much about them and their people.
Yeah, that's great advice, even amidst current circumstances with the pandemic going on. Kathy?
Sure. Some recommendations that I would have is to actually have other friends, family, maybe even folks for whom aren't necessarily friends or family, colleagues from internships or things like that, to have them review your resume. It's always helpful to give feedback just to see another third party reviewing your resume on what they feel may be supportive in that regard. So I definitely recommend doing that. I do have friends that send me their resumes and just review it. So it's always helpful just to get a sense for where that resume stands. And then another recommendation is with regards to templating, for lack of a better term, whether it's cover letters or even aligning your resume to the position itself. And what I mean by that is somebody who's getting, let's say, an accounting degree may be seeking an opportunity in the finance field or maybe even financial audit. But both of those resumes should be directed towards that opportunity. So slapping a resume and thinking it's going to be applicable to all job requisitions may not necessarily be the case. So really think through if you're trying to tackle either or in terms of different types of positions, really cater that resume. And so take that time to think through how that resume should be catered and get those built out. Whether you're also thinking about the consulting world, that consulting resume would not be applicable to a financial audit job, right? Or even an IT audit position. Really thinking about the intent and purpose of the requisition for which you're applying to and really catering your resume to that.
Yeah, that's great advice, Kathy, especially for any of our listeners that are in between trying to figure out which field they want to go into. Just keep in mind that it's okay to have multiple variations of your resume for the roles that you are seeking out. So thanks, Kathy. Dustin?
Yeah, Lexi, interviewing and recruiting season is a particularly stressful time for campus recruits. This is what you've been working for. This is when you finally get to start seeing the fruits of your labor from all the hard work in the classroom over the past several years. So, it can feel like everything's at stake. And while it is true that you're at a critical juncture, just keeping in mind that this is just a season and there will be resolution. You're going to find a job and you only need one yes. So, as challenging as it can be, as much as you can, just take the pressure off yourself, make your mantra that this is going to work out, and relieving yourself of that pressure is going to bode well for you as you go into interviews. And during those interviews and conversations, just try to relax. I can assure you that the person that's giving the interview is going to enjoy the conversation much more if you are also enjoying the conversation. In terms of going through the recruiting process in the current pandemic, interviews have been very interesting in the virtual world. So going into an interview, my advice would be to do everything that you can ahead of time to remove all the variables that could lead to disruption. Interviews are stressful enough without any surprises. So just making sure that you're in a quiet space where you won't be interrupted, double checking your internet connection and your microphone on the front end so that you can be confident that you're not going to have any technical issues there. Joining the interviews a few minutes early to make sure that you don't have delays can cut into that precious interview time. And finally, once you're in the interview, just try doing what you can to make sure that your presence and personality come through despite not being there in person.
Yeah, that's great advice, Dustin, especially when we're just trying to manage here in the pandemic. So just for anybody out there listening, take a breath before you click onto your interview. It's going to be okay. Cheryl?
Yes, all very great points that all the other speakers have had so far. But as far as additional advice that I would give young professionals considering the pandemic going on and kind of everything being conducted virtually nowadays, I would definitely highly recommend students to take a look at other opportunities for interviewing and just meeting other folks within the industry. There is other organizations such as the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, ISACA, And there are other organizations that are out there in the information security space that do have student memberships where you can actually meet other organizations and companies that might be looking for candidates as such as yourself. Just being able to conduct some of those virtual interviews, even just meeting at a virtual conference if there's some other event that's going on in the industry. So that's one avenue that I would recommend some candidates going through, just looking at how they can be better prepared for these interviews. And secondly, just being yourself and, just kind of highlighting your experience. You've kind of gone through several years of experience within your college degree. You know a lot. And if what you don't know, just be honest about that. If you get asked a question that you don't know, just say, hey, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm willing to learn. Just having that enthusiastic ability to actually do that additional self-study and being able to demonstrate that interest in researching on your own time. That's something that the interviewee would look for when we're interviewing our candidates.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's a good point about keeping it honest. If you're not sure, just let's let your interviewer know. And I bet that they will appreciate your willingness to learn and your upfrontness rather than trying to just come up with an answer on the spot. Last but not least, Derek.
Yeah, Lexi, the one thing I'd recommend is getting a mentor. And that could be somebody that perhaps is part of a regional security community meeting that are generally taking place virtually these days, but the ISSA or ISACA or the DEF CON chapters, and as an example in Nashville, Tennessee, there's the 615 chapter. So whatever kind of area you're trying to focus within the security space, just go to those community meetings and become members of them to, one, learn knowledge, and then a natural part of that process as you do networking and just talk with other like-minded individuals, you'll just have more opportunities to find the mentor that's right for you. And a mentor can do a lot to just lend confidence to one's own perspective. So if you may have questions about the interview process, talking to a mentor about your concerns and getting those addressed and having some things to counteract those concerns can go a long way to bring forth a lot of the elements that were discussed around, just presenting yourself as being confident, being easily able to talk to, perhaps doing a mock interview with the mentor can just go a long way in making oneself feel confident and just solidifying what one already knows.
That's great advice, Derek. Thank you guys so much. Rob, Kathy, Dustin, Cheryl, Derek, thank you for your time in answering these questions. And for all of our listeners, I hope that this is insightful. We wish you good luck as you're preparing for your interviews and recruiting season come up. And hope that you'll listen for us on the next episode. Thanks, everybody.